Jay, I'll let you take over.
Okay, Valerie, thanks again for inviting me to do this. I'll be your drawing instructor this afternoon. This class is roughly 2 hours. We're going to be doing an actual active drawing in the seminar. It's not a lecture class. And Valerie, can you see the PowerPoints in full screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. And then in a few minutes, I'll change my camera so you can see my actual drawing. I'm just going to kind of give you a brief overview. These are some of the drawings that we did, I think last summer. I said, this is, of course, orthographic projection part 1. Next week, I think on the 8th is part 2. We're going to be using color and more shading exercises. And so these are just some examples I quickly showed the students several months ago how to properly calculate shades and shadows on elements and facades. You probably remember if you're a returning student. Of course, orthographic projection is, of course, a plan and elevation projection method. In other words, the plan is generated first, and then the elevation or the section is projected above the floor plan. So there's really little measuring with a scale. You can probably do a lot of these drawings just by drawing them by geometry. So, but today in class, we're going to be drawing a small, it's either pronounced an edicula or aedicule. It depends on, I guess, where you have your education from. They're interchangeable. But an edicula is a small little temple or framed window or a special piece that goes around an altar with, of course, normally a sculpture or a window in it. A classic example of this is the famous Pantheon in Rome, designed and built in the 1st century AD during Hadrian's time. Apollodorus was his extraordinarily brilliant architect at this time. So the edicula are these Corinthian capitals with the pedimented above the sculptures in each one of these bays. So the edicula is a small little temple, a space or a structure within a structure to frame and commemorate either a sculpture or, of course, a window. Here's, of course, a beautiful section drawing of the Pantheon. There's other examples, ediculas and portals, occur on facades. These are just very few simple, let me shut my window just a minute. These are just just 1 or 2 examples of the larger world of architecture, but these are some sketches that I did to kind of construct the assignment you're gonna be drawing today. It's just gonna be small little temple pediment with an arch and, of course, properly drawn shades and shadows. Now, your schedule will be a little bit more refined than this. So if you look at this, when we start drawing these things, you really don't need to rely on measurements because we're going to be doing most of the things with the drawing system of squares. There's really just a few angles, a 90-degree angle to 45, of course, the 22.5-degree angle. The 22.5-degree angle is a very common, if not popular, pediment pitch for the pediment. Palladio uses this. A lot of ancient and, of course, Renaissance architects use. They divide the 45-degree in half. It becomes 22.5, which is the angle of the pediment. If you want to further your investigation in drawing proper shades and shadows, a wonderful book called Architectural Shades and Shadows by Henry McGoodwin. And he is actually manually calculated the proper way the solar angle is calculated in plan and elevation to show the proper depth of the shadows. We're not going to be doing anything quite this level of scientific calculation, but we're simply going to be drawing it by observation. So if you want to further your knowledge, it's a beautiful book. There are some extraordinary drawings to properly calculate how the shadows fall on corners and objects. You can see this diagram, how you carefully calculate the way the shadows fall on, of course, the details in some of these elevations. Okay, I'm going to change my camera over and I'm going to show you my drawing table. I'll get started drawing. So I think, Valerie, can you see the drawing table for the most part?
Yes, it's a little bit blurry, but it is there.
Okay, hold on just a moment. Okay, Valerie, is this any better? Oh, I'm sorry.
You'll just need to raise it slightly to center it up. Perfect.
Okay, so can you see the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay. So you should be able to see the plan of this first, right? let me just get this kind of squared away. Okay, Valerie, let me put that on pause for just a moment. I just want to make sure.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, it just seems to be kind of sinking slowly.
Okay, so you can see the plan, right? This. And how clear is that?
Yes.
Okay,
It'll be clear enough.
Okay, so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking either an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper properly. It would be better if you pulled the paper out of your sketchbook so the drawing is nice and flat. I like to use Strathmore paper to draw on. There's a small amount of tooth to it. Note that paper is really not very advantageous because it's too smooth.
Jay, the camera is falling slightly. Yeah.
Okay, hold on a minute. Okay, how was that? Sorry about that.
No, that's better. That works.
Okay. So first we're going to be drawing the plan of what I'm calling the edicula, or the little space within a space. You're going to be using you're going to be using, I like to use either a adjustable triangle, and then really these three tools, or the four tools: the triangle, the eraser, the pencil, and of course the sharpener. I like to use a metal sharpener because they're just a very crisp versus using the plastic sharpener. And if my camera keeps moving down, just let me know, Valerie. Okay, so how are we doing on the, can you still see this, Valerie? Okay. Okay, so if you can see this, first we're going to start drawing the plan. I'm just going to show you, this is just kind of a quick diagram of what we're actually going to be drawing today, just a small little temple front. They're going to be showing shades and shadows. So then when we start, we're going to start drawing the plan. So the first thing to do is to draw just a little box that's 2 1/4 inches wide. And they're going to draw the plan of this an inch from the bottom of the paper, 2 1/4 inches in width, and then an inch in depth. So in other words, we're just going to be showing the small plan of the little temple. And so Valerie, are you able to see this pretty well?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so the first thing to do is to draw the plan. An inch, it's going to be an inch deep by 2 1/4 inches wide. So just draw a rectangle that is roughly an inch by 2 1/4 inches. Now what you're going to be doing is draw the center line of that. You can use your scale. What you're going to be doing is dividing, you're going to draw the midpoint of this. So then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be dividing each segment into 4 segments. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can see with the red Sharpie marker, I mean, you really should be using either an HB or 2B lead. I'm using the Sharpie marker because it's dark and a little clearer to see. But you're going to be just showing a small little square column. So we'll just kind of show that in plan. Okay. And Valerie, are you able to see that on your end pretty clearly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so then what you do, to make a long story short, you just divide each half segment into 4 segments. They can roughly be drawn 1/4 inch across the base there. So then you're going to be drawing 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch column and plan. So in other words, that's going to be showing how to properly draw the width of the edicula's column. So this is going to be 1/4 inch.
Oh, Jay, I just realized the photo, it's upside down for everyone.
It is? Okay, let me pause that for just a minute. Hold on. Sorry about that. Okay, Valerie, how was that?
Perfect.
Okay. So let's go back to the original part of the assignment. We're just going to be showing the plan. And Valerie, is that pretty clear?
Looks good.
Okay. Okay, so again, I'm just going to leave this up on the screen for a few minutes. You're just going to be showing the plan of the temple or the edicula. You're going to be taking the 2 1/4 inch dimension, dividing it in half, and then you're going to be dividing this into 4 equal segments on each side of the central line. Then you're going to, of course, be drawing what's called the square or the plan of the column in the little temple front. So in other words, in plan, you're going to be drawing the diameter of the thickness of course, you're going to be drawing the plan of those columns, the square columns. Then what you can do is draw the other little pieces, just in kind of engaged pilaster behind that. Just kind of, you could probably draw this by 1/4 inch by 1/8, just a small little block. So then after you get through doing that, just space the plan and the elevation roughly about 1.5 inches above the plan. Then you're going to be drawing what's called the 2 squares, lightly with pencil. Again, I'm using, ink to show the clarity, but you really should be using either an HB, nothing softer than a 2B pencil. And these can just be very light construction lines. You can measure it 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. Or you can use your adjustable triangle and draw the 2 1/4 inch dimension and plan, and then project that up to the square. You can show light construction lines at first, light only. Just show 2 squares in elevation. And I just like to show the center line for clarity. So again, the plan is the generator of all things. It starts at the base. Then of course, 1.5 inch gap. Then of course, the 2 squares that are 2 1/4. So I'm sorry, 2.5. I made a mistake. 2 1/4 by 2 1/4, not 2.5. I'm sorry about that. We're using the system of squares to draw all these things with. Okay, so when you get the second square drawn, let's divide the square into 3 equal segments. So we're looking at, I think that's 3/4 inch for each segment. And that will determine the placement and the size of the arch we're going to be sketching. I'll give you a few minutes to make sure it's 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. I made a horrible mistake, sorry. Okay, so in plan, when we talk about orthographic projection, instead of measuring all these things in elevation, you can derive the elevation from the plan. So in other words, I just would, and you don't have to have a very carefully measured drawing. It can be rough, for the most part, freehanded. So then I would just project these columns up to draw the elevation. You can see the red lines, just kind of lightly show construction lines. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. So on number 3 in the top quadrant of the square, you're going to be showing where the spring line is of the arch. So now there's the spring line, I'm sorry, you're going to be showing the apex of the arch. So then, of course, from 3 to 1, you're going to be showing the spring line. So you can use a circle template. You can just freehand the curve from number 1 to number 3. You're just going to be showing a nice freehanded arch. Again, you can use a circle template or a compass. The radius will be placed at the center of line number 1. We'll go up to number 3. And I'll just kind of pause that so you'll have some time to sketch. And if I'm going
to a quick question. What is the reason for using inches versus metric?
I guess I'm more comfortable using feet just inches than metric myself, but you can use either one. And if I'm going too fast, please let me know. I don't mind pause. I think I'll pause this to make sure that we have this thing correctly constructed. Again, you're drawing roughly 2 squares, 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. Then in the top section, the top square, you'll be drawing the actual arch. Okay, so let's use our 45-degree angle instead of measuring things. I like to just show, you can do a 45-degree line from the top corner. We're just going to be showing a projection. I just roughly drew what's called the bottom of the pediment at, I think I drew it at 3/4 of an inch. So what you can do is project this thing out 3/4 of an inch from the corner, and then just draw a base for the pediment. So this is roughly 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. So the next thing you'll do is draw a square from this corner to this corner. If you don't have a scale, then you can sort of use a little cheat sheet and you can simply with this make a little tick mark here and then draw the square that goes up to there like that. Or of course the easiest thing to do is to use your scale. It's really too soon. So to draw the actual pediment, there is a special way to figure out the angle. You can divide the square in half, or you can use your adjustable triangle and set it on 22.5 degrees. So really the slope of the pediment was here. And construct that. Then you can just kind of draw another parallel line from this corner to this corner and show the thickness of the sloped pediment. That, of course, that will complete the top of what I'm calling the edicula. Okay, so let's go back down to the radius of the curve. We're going to be showing what's called the keystone. The keystone is really the last structural member placed in an arch because it braces. When the formwork is installed with wood, then of course the voussoirs, the diagonals in the arch, are built from the spring line up, and of course the keystone is the last stone that locks the structure in place. Then of course the wooden formwork is removed. So how would we draw the keystone? Always go back to the radius point, and you can draw the keystone as thin or wide as you want. It's just kind of a, at this point, it's kind of a decorative detail. Okay, so let's go back to the bottom. Let's kind of draw the windowsill of the edicula. What I would do is just take a 45-degree line and draw a square here, draw a square here, then project that down. This will be the same dimension as the sill. Just project that down. You can measure that and make that a square. I think that's 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so now you should have the plan and of course the elevation of the edicula carefully drawn. Okay, so I'll just kind of leave this up on the board so you've got behind. Okay, so how is everyone doing on this so far? Okay, I'm going to remove this sheet for a minute. I'm just going to show you. We're going to start drawing shades and shadows on this, and there's a specific way to draw these. There's a very easy way, but kind of watch. You don't worry about drawing this. I'm just going to remove the sheet. I'm just going to show you some shade and shadow relationships. Because I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily draw the profile of, let's just start with a square projection or rectangular one like this. Okay, so the 45-degree angle will become the solar angle on the facade. So the first thing to do is, if you have your elevation, let's say this is just a larger detail of what we just drew, is I'm just going to be casting 45-degree solar angles on each one of the corners. Let's say if we have the sill projects out to here, we're going to be showing the solar angle on, of course, the back plane like that. Now, keep in mind, you can determine how far these things project by the virtue of how far the shadows project on the wall. So if it's an early morning, like if this is an early morning sun or a late evening sun, of course, the shadows will be very, very elongated. If it's more like high noon or 11 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the shadow will be relatively short. You can determine how far the shadows are projected onto the wall. So you don't have to draw this. I'm just showing this for an example. So again, if this is like high noon, roughly the shadows are probably relatively small. Then with a consistent 45-degree grain with your pencil, it should just go back and kind of connect the corners. So it's quickly and very easy to show 3 dimensions in an elevation really without showing either an axonometric or perspectival drawing. Okay, that's an example. You don't have to sketch out. I just was showing it. And of course, then the curve will be exactly the same. What you'll do is the same curve will be transposed down onto the facade behind that. You can show little tick marks on the curve, maybe project those down. And of course, you'll just go back and show that in. But of course, this is a quick example. We can go back through that step by step. But the first thing to do is, that's just kind of a quick, I think we did this in our class a couple of months ago when we did orthographic projection. But let's kind of look at something else first. Okay, let's go back to our plan. So let me know if I'm going too fast. I just want to make sure we have enough time to digest this information. Let's kind of take a look at the ground floor plan, or the plan of the edicula. I'm just going to draw this as a larger scale. Again, you take half of this subdivided into 4 spaces. Then we're going to show the column. And also try not to shade in the columns. That's simply just for clarity for the student purpose. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be doing is pretend, this is the elevation. We're going to be casting up these elements. Okay, so let's, before we just start arbitrarily determining how deep the shadows are on the wall, let's kind of go back to the plan. We're going to start with the plan and then project that up to the elevation, or I like to call them facades. So if we were to draw the solar angle in plan at 45-degree angles, the shadows would be very deeply inset into the wall. So in other words, if this is 45 degrees, you can use your adjustable triangle and project 45 degrees back to the back plane of each one of these corners. And I almost forgot to draw the little pilasters behind that on the wall. So obviously, if you were to project the shadows from the plane on the elevation, the 45-degree angle, the shadows would be very, very deep and elongated on the facade. So you can just imagine that if it's 45, then of course, you don't have to draw this right now. These are just quick examples. So let's take a look. What we're going to be doing is a 60-degree angle, which will be a little bit, the shadow will be a little bit less prominent on the facade. So let's draw the plan again. Again, we're going to divide that into four sections. Then, of course, project that up like this. Project up. Let's use 30, 60. In plan, we're going to be doing 60 degrees. So you can adjust that on your triangle to be 60. So then, of course, what you'll do is I'm using red to emphasize the clarity. You're going to be using mostly pencil, really probably an HB. 2B is fine as well too. 2B is very soft. So then you just project that up onto the wall behind that, and that will determine the placement of the shadows. So if you were to draw this carefully, look at the detail. There's a small little gap in the elevation between the edge of the column and the wall behind that. Okay, is anyone lost? I don't hear any voices. That means we're in good shape. Great. Okay, let me go back to our original drawing. You can pull your other drawing up. Now this is a much smaller scale than we've been working. This is a much smaller scale than the larger ones I've been. These are just to kind of provide some clarity to the actual elevation. But let's start establishing some shadows. Again, the first thing to do is always go back to your plan and draw the solar angle in plan. So in other words, let me go back. Sorry, I had the wrong one. Okay, so let's go back to this. So 60 degrees, let's just draw that in plan, would be here, here, and then here. So I just shade that in plan to show that the entire part is going to be shown in shadow. Then what you do is just project those lines. You really shouldn't have to measure anything at this point. Just project them up. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens when it meets the arch. So what I would do is project, let's do the elevation will be 45, in plan it'll be 60. So the plan is 60 degrees. The elevation on the wall is 45 degrees. So what I'm showing you earlier is you just show 45-degree angles on every single corner. Okay, so let's take a look at where the elevation on the back facade meets the spring line. I just would kind of lightly go and shade that in. Okay, so let's draw a 45-degree angle from the center point of the radius, then from the spring line. What you're going to be doing is you're just going to be projecting the curve. The sun draws the edge of the curve exactly the same curve on the back plane. So I would start with the spring line, if you can see this. You could probably take trace paper and trace this curve and draw it behind on the back plane. And again, this is a sketch. You know, we're not really mounting this down on a parallel bar. You can still barely see the edge of the shadow from the pilaster on the back. And I can go back and repeat that. I think I probably lost a few people. And that's a little bit more complicated than I kind of anticipated. Would anyone like me to go back and stop and do a larger detail of that? Okay, well, in that case, we'll just continue. So in other words, you know, the same 60-degree angle will be drawn in every single corner, like so-and-so, shaded in plan. Project this part up. So at this point, you're simply just connecting the dots. Then like with a nice 45-degree angle for the shading, I just would go back and shade the whole thing in. Okay, so let's take a look at how would you draw the shadow for the windowsill. So again, I would just project that down in plan, draw a 45-degree angle. The same thing on the right side we did on the left. Okay. Then I would just take the same 60-degree angle, it looks like our drawings are going to start overlapping each other. What's happened is it's interesting that the corners all meet. So actually this thing will be completely in shadow. Okay, so then let's, what we're going to be doing is just kind of, we're going to be eyeballing part of this. As you know, we're not, you know, taping this down onto a drawing board and doing this as perfectly as possible. What I would just do is go ahead and draw the shadow. You can just kind of imagine the same length from the part on the left, then of course to the pediment. So in other words, this line will be the same angle as the pediment because the objects cast are the same parallel angle. So then what you can do is for the shadow from the bottom of the pediment will just be drawn like this. You can just pull the line up to just represent that the keystone is pulled forward of the part in the back. Let me kind of shade that. Now, again, this is kind of roughly a free-handed sketch. It'll be a little more complicated if we were to draw this as kind of a hard line drawing, but this, of course, is just to get you to show 3 dimensions on just kind of a flat plane. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that so far? Or? Valerie, do you have any questions about that?
Hold on, we have one comment. It says, oops, am I understanding this right? Should there be a sliver of light between the column and the plaster on the left?
Yes, exactly. Very good observation. You know, if to do this correctly, you would have to probably go back and see this edge will be projected up on the back plane. Then probably what would happen is the arch would continue, you would barely see the little curve. So this would actually be light. That's a very good observation. You can probably go back and erase that. In other words, what's happening is the sun is transcribing this arch curve onto the back plane. You can just simply, you can probably just draw with your circle template, the compass, the radius mark here, and just draw two consecutive curves like that. So in other words, this would all be shown as light. Yes, very good observation. And of course, if I could, let me see if I can maybe emphasize that a little better. Yeah. So, you know, if the shadow was 45, then pretty much most of this would probably be in shadow, because the 45-degree angle in plan would be so much more, you know, more pronounced. And hopefully you're using pencil. Okay, so the next step of this drawing is to just kind of draw a border around the sketchbook or the sketch page. And what I like to do is to really project the frontal elements, of course, the profile of the sloped pediment, of course, the windowsill, the columns for how would we make those read forward. What I would do is just do a light study of value. If you can see the pencil, in other words, what you're going to be doing is with a consistent 45-degree grain, is to go back behind this and kind of lightly show the shading. So that way the edicula is projected out in front of the picture plane. So I would just draw a nice border around this, and then you're going to let the value create the edge for you. So all the way around that. And Valerie, are you able to see the pencil? Sometimes graphite doesn't show up very well on the screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see it enough.
And also, you know, this is not a perfect drawing. I as you know, for architecture students, majors, anyone, I like to show the construction a little bit more intriguing than just making it look like a perfect rendering, because, you know, this all shows your thought process. That's a beautiful frameable piece of artwork. Okay, so I'll kind of leave that up for a few seconds, and I'm going to pull the sheet off and show you another little detail. And I kind of have to assume that a lot of you guys, I'm sure, have drawn in some sort of capacity, but really to master to properly draw shades and shadows and values, I'm going to show you something. I'm just going to pull this sketch away for just a few seconds. And I'd like everyone to make sure you're paying attention, to make your work look as professional as possible. Let's take a look at the value on the front pediment. I'm just going to draw a large detail. So, obviously we can see that and you've clearly drawn the shades and shadows on this object. And then, of course, you're going to be showing value in the background. The best thing to do, instead of just showing an outline, because my beginning drawing students, they draw outlines for everything. To make this pediment read a little bit more professionally sound is that you would draw kind of watch this for a minute. It would look much stronger as if you let the value create the edge for you. In other words, the background can die into, and you can use the edge of a sheet of paper to make, or your straight edge, and then kind of build the values up to this end. So that way you don't need to draw a line to show the value. It has a lot more atmosphere to it. See, look how much more elegant this relationship is versus the one we just drew. This looks like a student drawing. This looks like a professional person that is using value to create the edge for you. And you can, of course, do that for, like, if this were all pencil, I would go back and erase this edge. You don't really need that because the value should create the edge for you, especially with the shadows. I know it's a little bit confusing because I'm using the red to articulate the shadows. Of course, you're using all pencil. No, because by this time we don't really, our next few round of drawings, we don't need to be showing outlines for everything. That kind of ruins the sort of atmospheric quality of these. Yeah, because everyone really should be drawing with pencil, not really pen. I think, as a teacher, I think this part gets a little bit confusing about the merger of the elevation and plan. I'm not sure that's exactly correct, but by now you should have a pretty simple way to convincingly draw shades and shadows to make things look three-dimensional. Look how powerful just that, I think we did this in 30, 45 minutes. Okay, I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 more minutes to kind of get that at a place where we're kind of at a stopping place, and we're going to take a break at 1 for about 15 minutes, and we'll do another drawing. And then Valerie, is there a way that each one of the students can share the screen? Because I would like to see the student work so we can all see.
It can. So individually, we can call out who we want to go through and select screen share, or if they don't want to do a screen share because they don't have a camera or a way to show it off, or they don't want to put it up to the camera in front of their faces or anything like that, they can also attach a file to the chat and we can view them there as well.
Okay, good. Then I think I'm going to work on my lighting when we take a break to make sure it's clear and visible. Can I go ahead and just pull this sketch off for a minute? Well, since it's being recorded, I'll kind of do another example. Okay, so on my table is really how to properly transfer the arched as a shadow. What I was saying is it's the same angle. This is really a freehand drawing here, so you can use your radius or your circle template, but you can, transfer the curve 45 degrees lower. And then, of course, you can see the apexes are the same points, the radius, the spring line, and then you just go back in and shade in the proper shadow. And let me know if I'm going too fast. Okay, then if you want, you can go back and add some more details. You can articulate the spring line of the columns and just have small projection. Of course, there'll be a small shadow underneath this.
Hey Jay, I'm not sure if I missed anything, but I got kicked off for a minute, but I am back on.
Oh, that's all right. I just was asking the class if I needed to slow down or stop on something just so they can see everything. Okay, so before we kind of go on our break, there's one thing I was going to point out, and I noticed that it would have been better as if, I had you separate the plan drawing from the elevation a little bit further, because if you look at this, really the shadow from this corner here would then be transcribed down like this. But that's my fault. I didn't leave enough room between the plan drawing and the elevation to really show that. But so in other words, the shadow would really, if you look at this, the sun, as wonderful as a draftsman as this person is that the edges are transferred onto the back plane 45 degrees further onto the wall like that. But then of course it gets very fussy the way it kind of interrupts the plan drawing. But at least you can figure out shadows from the plan and then project them up into the elevation to determine the depth without really measuring them on a scale. Okay, so we have about 5 more minutes until our break. Did you guys have any questions about anything? We can go back and kind of polish these up when we come back in about 15 or 20 minutes. So then I think Valerie at 2 o'clock, I think we'll just kind of, if we could share some of the, I'd like to see the student drawings.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay. Okay, it's almost 1 o'clock. I think I'll leave this up on the board for you guys so you can finish your drawing. And then I think Valerie I'll take like a 15-minute break, and then I'll give you guys time to take a breather. And then if you want to finish some of your details, that's fine. So we'll regroup at 1:15. Valerie, does that work?
Works for me.
Okay, great. Okay, let's regroup in just a few minutes. Hopefully this will give you time to actually finish the drawing.
Hey Jay, we had something in chat for there is another observation. The shadow under the pediment on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it would shade the facade, but it would not be at an angled shadow on the right because the wall is not in the same plane. The shadow would have a vertical line.
You're talking about on this corner.
I am gonna let the person,
Okay.
Carolyn, if you want to unmute, because if I knew this, I would be the one teaching.
No, that's okay. No.
So I'm gonna let you guys chat about it.
Yeah. Yes, that is the correct corner.
Okay, yeah, could you repeat the question again?
As I was working on my drawing and observing everything, I realized that the cast shadow on the right side, the pediment projects slightly, and then it drops down on the foremost facade. But because the light is coming from our right, it's illuminating the wall, the main wall, which is in a further back plane, and it would not be in shadow. That little tiny red triangle.
Yeah, you're talking about this one. Well, no, there would be a shadow here, but I think it would be much shorter. There would just be a little. Yeah, I noticed that. But you know, I mean, we could spend a whole day on properly calculating the shadows, but this is just kind of a free-handed exercise. But I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be square up because the side we can't see is illuminated in full sun. And so it would have a cast shadow, which would be square on the right side.
Well, I still think that the shadow would still be like this on the right. Because I mean, it does, because the pediment projects out to roughly about here. So there will be a shadow, there have to be a shadow on the wall behind it. This, you know, it's a little bit confusing because, you know, the question is this coplanar with this? You know, just by the way I've shown the shadow, it does project out farther.
Farther, yeah.
But you know, I think, yeah, that's a good question. I think roughly it would be, there would be probably a smaller shadow here because
because we're not, this type of drawing is not three-dimensional.
well, it has a three-dimensional quality because we can see the depth, but it's not an axonometric or perspectival drawing. But I guess if that answers your question, there still will be a shadow here cast on the wall behind that.
But it would, okay.
But I think maybe to answer your question, you know, I really still think it's because I haven't really clarified, is this pediment in the same plane as this? You know, so I really didn't do that, but I guess for the intents and purposes of the class, you know, you have liberties in projecting us as far as you want. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but there still will be a shadow here on the back plane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, there's probably a lot of questions. You know, it would take us, you know, many hours to hardline this and carefully calculate every little corner. But you know, it's roughly about an hour, you know, sketch. But you have good questions. I'm glad that the students are picking up with some of these, what I'm calling discrepancies.
Yeah, because I do a lot of observational perspective drawing. So for me, this is like messing with my head, so to speak. So
well, you know, shades and properly drawing shades is a very complicated language. Yeah, my intent was not to just throw everyone off or just a hard ball curve, but you know, I think by now we can tell that we've taken, you know, normally a kind of a bland two-dimensional line drawing and made it look three-dimensional just by a few strokes of shades and shadows. Yeah, we're not. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's like I said, it's a different type of way of describing it.
Yeah.
And
okay.
It's all new for me. But thanks.
Good.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, again, you know, this drawing typology takes a lot of practice. You know, this is just, we could spend, I'm sure Henry McGoodwin in the book excerpts that we looked at probably spent days drawing one elevation. It's just a very complex language of shadows. But anyway, you can see that in just in about an hour, we can sort of roughly show you know, 3 dimensions in just a 2-dimensional kind of a drawing. But
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
okay, well, I hope I didn't confuse everyone, but the questions in the comments about the light coming into here on the left is completely valid. That's very interesting, especially the corner here. Okay, I think it's about, I think we have, we're going to do one more quick study, and I took some of the details of it. It should be a little bit easier to draw. Is everyone ready to do another one, or do you want to, or does the class want to spend some time and make this drawing look more finished? Or any suggestions? You can unmute your, because I thought this was going to take 2 hours for us to draw, and since, you know, I've probably been drawing much longer than some of your other students, I'm really not sure how to gauge things, but I thought we were going to spend the whole 2 hours on this one drawing. But any thoughts or suggestions? You'll have to unmute your. Okay. Okay, well, I guess we can kind of regroup. The class should roughly end about 2 or 2:15. There's another one I was going to have you do. It's a similar one, but a little bit simpler to do. And it's kind of the same dimensions, the same construction technique. You're just do another sketch, and you're going to be showing what's called a curved niche carved out of a thick wall. So and if you want to use color just to clarify, you can. It's fine. It just, for most people that sketch, they use pencil, but as a teacher, it's really helpful to use different colors. So we're just going to show the curved niche with these dimensions: 2¼ inch block by 1 1/8 inch. So in other words, it is going to be, you know, roughly 2 squares, and you're going to make this roughly about 1 inch above the base. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we're going to be showing the same thing where you just draw the 2 squares. So the first thing to do is to draw the geometry roughly about 2 inches above, excuse me, the back of the arch niche wall. So the first thing to do is just to draw this block with the numbers I've kind of established here. So the 1 1/8 is really the entire depth. So why don't you sketch that in your book? The block with the curved niche, let's look at this. You know, it's always good to draw a central line because classical architecture is relatively symmetrical. So I would take half of these and divide them into 3 segments. You can, since it's such a freehand sketch, you can simply eyeball the 3 segments. Okay, so you pretty much have all the information just to draw the squares. Then we'll talk about the header and, of course, the windowsill after you get that done. So obviously what you do is you start with the plan first, as always. Then, of course, you can freehand or use your compass or the circle template to draw, of course, the half circle. Of course, this is half of a full circle. And then you're just going to project up the elements from plan and create, excuse me, the elevation. So obviously to draw the width of what's calling the segmented arched niche is that you just project up the corners from plan into the elevation. This is square number 1. This is square number 2. Okay, so in square number 2, you're going to divide The two, obviously these are both 2 1/4. Going to divide this line into 3 segments. So the top third will, of course, will be the spring line for the arch. And since you're freehanding this, you can determine the segment. We're not going to be drawing a full circle like this. You're just going to be drawing kind of a segment of the curve. And you could determine the size of the segmented curve yourself. That's fine. Oh, it's actually already 1:30. Okay, so did that, I think you have a general idea of how to properly draw the niche and the curve. Then what you can do is the top of course, the square, you can determine the size of what's called the header, and then of course the sill below that. That's up to you to determine the size. I like to just show, to draw these, a projection, I just like to show the 45-degree from the corner and to just project that down. But you can make that any way that you want to. We're going to do 2 things on that. Then, of course, you're just going to be showing some brackets that represent the width of the wall between on either side of the niche. So of course in Planner you're going to be showing the projection of the windowsill. You can just project that down. That becomes the base where the arch niche dies into. Okay, so after you have that established, it's the same technique we did before, where we're just going to draw a nominal 45-degree angle for the solar angle. And let's do 45 in plan this time. So where each corner is, that will be the shadow in plan. So to make your life easier, I just draw a 45-degree angle on every corner. The same thing with the edge of the wall, the windowsill. Then of course you just project up to determine the shadow's length. Then of course the elevation will be 45. We just on every corner draw the 45-degree angle. And you can determine how far these brackets project out. So, it's a case where we're having the same overlapping problem we did before, but anyway, it's just kind of a graphic method to show 3 dimensions. Okay, so how would you determine how far the shadow is from this edge? We go back to our plan. So this corner is here. It's actually this one here. So then the depth will be determined by the placement of it in plan, and then you just project up. And then you just connect the dots, return, go up again. The same thing with this one. Wow, look how long the shadow is on the base. Then you just go back in and fill the shadow in. And just for graphic purposes, I just leave a small shadow for the brackets, since probably most of that will be in shade. But just for the drawing purposes, you can show that most of this will be done in shade, because look how long the shadow is on here. So I just would trace the profile like this, like that. Okay, so let's look carefully at the curved shadow in plan. Is that tells you exactly where the shadow will fall on the curved niche in plan. Now this is a very complex intersection of parts, the segmented curve and the semicircular curve in plan. We're just simply going to do the same technique we did earlier, where we just project 45 where the corner would be established. We're just going to be showing the same curve. So that way, just go back and fill in the shaded parts like that. Now, depending on how deep the circle is, it looks like the circle is deeper than the wall thickness here. Of course, that would yield, this would be a much longer shadow than the one on the back. And then I just like to show a small shadow for the header above that. The same thing we did with the sill. Then obviously we'll have a shadow on the corner on the right. The same thing with this one. Have I confused anyone yet? Probably. Okay, let's stop in about 5 minutes. Okay, I'm just going to show a large detail of the base. And I kind of wish I would have shown more distance between the elevation and plan, but nonetheless, I think we can still show convincing light and shade. Okay, so let's take a look at the profile of the shadow on the projected base with the brackets. Now in section, it's really kind of doing this. Here's the windowsill, here's the brackets. Again, you can determine how far the brackets project, but for the most part, to draw the shadow of these elements onto the wall behind that, then it's just a simple trick of drawing the 45 to each corner. And then going back and connecting the dots. I'm sorry, connecting the corners. So they probably would do something a little more like this. And then, of course, you can show a small shadow underneath this because, of course, this projects from the front of the brackets behind that. So in other words, this in plan is really, I'm sorry, this in elevation is really this one here.
I think you accidentally muted yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Did you hear me talk about how to properly draw the cyma recta at the top? Anyway, I was just showing you some different details. You can, finish off the cap or the header of this with some details. And then what you can do is you can either show an arched pediment, which is the same radius as this, like that, because Michelangelo alternates the pediments in his wonderful Renaissance building is curved and then triangular and then curved. Then, of course, for your own purposes, you can go back in and shade in the background to establish the level of projected elements, which are lighter than the ones behind that, which is kind of a medium to light layered graphite. So that way the pediment projects, I'm sorry, the edicula projects out much further, of course, than the back plane. Okay, so we have about 10 more minutes, I guess, to finish your, do you have time to finish your drawings? I can answer some questions. Okay, so why don't we stop in about 5 or so minutes? We'll kind of review some things. Okay, I think it's right about 2 o'clock. Let's kind of take a break, and you can go back and finish these in your sketchbook or on your drawing table. I was going to show you. You know,
One little chat thing, and it says the niche. It's the same plane as the wall, but in this type of drawing, does the paper stay white, whereas the wall is a light value of pencil graphite?
yeah, in other words, so this will be shown as white, but actually, really, because these two things, the cap, the pediment, and this part of the face will be shown white because it's the furthest towards your eye. Then of course the part in the back will be shaded in with some value. Because what we're trying to achieve here is to make the projection come as forward as possible. If that answers your question. Hopefully that does. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So in other words, these elements that are furthest towards your eye will be shown with really no value. So then, of course, everything that's much further beyond that will be shown with value.
Jay, we got another question. What about
Okay.
the curved wall of the niche?
The curved wall of the niche. Well, yeah, and actually, if you look at this, I might have shaded this incorrectly, but really, by the time it gets to the front corner, the sunlight is here. So roughly what you'll be doing is the shading will kind of blend a little bit further to where it gets completely light. So it'll show that so to make it look round in elevation, it'll just kind of just gently fade out to the left like this. I think it's a little bit confusing because the red shows where the shadows exactly fall, but it will kind of gradually blend in from the right side to the left side, if that makes sense. Yeah. But again, you can kind of just, eyeball the different shadows because it's really confusing to show the two curves merging together. So, if that answers your question.
It does. And it looks like several participants are hopping off, Jay. So I think now's a good time to wrap up.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Well, I was just going to say, and I guess we can look at your work a little bit later, but, I think some learning outcomes is to, learning how to draw and project elements from plan into the elevation. And then it's really interesting with a few, strokes, even if they're simple or complex, you can make a two-dimensional drawing look very three-dimensional with just a few little techniques on how to show shades and shadows. That's kind of all I have for today, and then I'm sure we have some other questions. Also, for our next drawing studio on Tuesday, I'd like you to bring some colored pencils in, and I can, Valerie, I can email them a list of some extra tools I can pick up, so we can start establishing some color for some different. That we're going to be showing the cool versus warm colors and shades and shadows. Also, we're going to be doing, this will be our last orthographic projection class. And then the classes after that will be the perspectival drawing class. So, for next Tuesday, I would like to see at least some of your drawings that you've done in class. And I'm sure you'll probably have some questions. We have about a few more minutes for questions. Does anyone have anything else to ask or? Again, this is kind of just a quick study of showing, the facades as three-dimensional layers versus just showing it as a two-dimensional drawing. We could spend hours and hours on properly calculating all the proper solar angles, but this is just kind of a quick study, to kind of improve and get your elevational studies look a little bit more dramatic and three-dimensional. Does anybody have any other questions or comments or?
We've had a few other participants leave, so I think we're good to go.
Oh, okay. All right, guys, thanks for coming back to class. I'll see you next Tuesday. And Valerie, I'd like to email them, Alyssa, some extra tools, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks again.